and welcome to Nelson All Over Cards. Today we have part 3 of the deck building series that Villain Theory and I are doing. Villain Theory is back on because he is the brains of the operation. How you doing, Villain Theory?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Hopefully, I've got enough brains for this.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So the previous 2 videos, I recommend going and watching those first. Part 1 is all about the cost curve. Part 2 is all about resources, and today we are talking about resource generators and resource sinks. So we will assume, going forward, we're assuming that you have seen those videos. We may reference terminology and ideas and everything that we talked about in those. So just be aware. We're going to be talking about that. So resource generators, before we talk about all of that, Villain Theory, can you tell me where people can find you?
Yes. So if you're interested in anything I do, I make a lot of decks. You can find those on Marvel CDB. Pretty popular website in the in the hobby. I post things on Reddit, and you'll see me around.
Awesome. So I had a ton of fun talking about resources and talking about the different types of resources, the doubles, the power-ups, the audacities, resources that do things, all of that. And that, I think, tees us up really nicely for the discussion around resource generators. And you gave me a really cool resource generator description, what you define a resource generator as. Can you repeat that now that we are recording?
Can I repeat that? Let's try it. No. A resource generator to me is anything that gives you, effectively pays a resource or saves you a resource on the turn. So it includes not just general, actually generating a resource, but drawing a card or something that says you pay 1 less for, the next, X card. All those things to me, have let you pay, 1 extra towards something that turn.
Okay. So core set, Avengers Mansion, Helicarrier, these are the types of cards that this video is going to be focused around. We're going to be talking about the types of resource generators and when you want to be using them. And then resource sinks, which we'll let's just focus on resource generators now. We can define and talk about resource sinks in a little bit, but talking about resource generators, those are the easy ones. Any other, I guess, Quinn Carrier and all of those, but anything else before we start getting any more technical, that just the high level before we dive into all of the fun stuff?
I don't think so in particular. I genuinely think card draw, normal resource generation and discounts cover kind of everything. There will be different cards that target different things. Depends how much what you mean by technical and fun stuff, because the technical stuff is the fun stuff to me.
Fair. Alrighty, so let's talk about restricted and unrestricted cards. Now, our resource generators. Now, this is a term I was unfamiliar with that you brought to my attention when we were discussing the making of this videos, and I think it's credited to Tony Tales, if I'm incorrect. Okay.
I don't know if that's where it first came from or anything, but that is where I first heard it on his videos, and I thought it was a really apt terms for what we're about to discuss.
Okay, and can you tell me what a restricted versus an unrestricted resource generator is?
Yeah, absolutely. So, an unrestricted resource generator is something that generates a resource that can be spent on anything. So Helicarrier is a good example of this. You can use that, okay, you can't use Helicarrier to pay, the cost on an attachment, to remove that from the villain. But you can use it for pretty much every hero card going, it's not locked to, this specific type of card, or do you have this trait on the card, you can spend that on anything. Quinn Carrier is restricted in the sense of who can play it, but the resource it generates goes toward anything. There are hero resource generators. 4 has God of Thunder. Captain America has Super Soldier Serum. Those all go toward anything. Those are what I would call unrestricted.
Okay, so it is not necessarily who can play it, it is what it pays for. So like a restricted would be like a Martial Prowess, where it can only pay for attack events. Or the X-Jet is the unrestricted, even though it's restricted in who can play it, can go to anyone. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
We're level set. And restricted. Talk to me about the difference here. I'm not even going to try and speculate here, but like, why would you ever want to run a restricted resource generator? I guess is a good question.
There are multiple levels of restricted, I will say, first of all. So let's say you've got unrestricted is you spend it on anything. Then you've got spend on a type of card. So let's go with Martial Prowess, which you mentioned. So you can spend it on any attack card, but it could be a hero attack card or an aspect attack card or a basic attack card. And at the extreme end of the spectrum, you've got something like Expert Marksman, which is a Hawkeye hero card. You can only spend it on arrow cards. And the only cards of those in the game are in his hero kit. So they are very limited to one type of card that only he can get. That is the most restricted. And the benefits of the restricted ones are normally that they are cheaper. The most restricted ones tend to be hero cards, so they generally work with what your hero comes with. Another medium one might be Black Widow's. I think they're called Black Widow's Gauntlet or Bracelet.
Black Widow Gauntlet,
yeah. Which you can spend on preparations, most of which will probably be her own ones, but you can spend them on the aspect ones. And I believe they are 1 cost each. I think Expert Marksman, 1 cost each. And, Heli Carrier, you're looking at 3 cost each. Same for Quinn Carrier, same for X-Jet. So you can spend them on anything you like, but they are more expensive. And that's generally the gist of it. Martial Prowess falls in the middle. Aspect cards, Aspect and basic all generally do tend to be more expensive than than hero cards. Sorry, hero cards tend to be a little bit cheaper for what you get in general. But also, comparing Heli Carrier to Martial Prowess, the reason you would probably really go for Martial Prowess over Heli Carrier is just because it is cheaper. Or you like the physical resource it generates. But generally, it's because it's cheaper to get in play in the first place.
Yeah. Okay. So the resource generators, you have the gray ones, you have the hero specific ones, and you have the martial prowess, the sense of justice. Oh no, I'm not gonna be able to do these.
Nerves of Steel.
Nerves of Steel. That's it. The one that I probably should know. Nerves of Steel. There's a lot of them out there. And what is going through your mind on how many of these should I be putting in my deck when I'm looking at a hero deck build and maybe like a cost curve or the resources that I've already put in there? What's preventing me from running like all of these that I can?
Yeah, so that's a really good point. So again, let's stick with Martial Prowess is a good place to start, I think, because that only works on attacks. So if you're not running that many attacks, Martial Prowess might get a turn where you don't use it. You might get 2 turns where you don't use it because you're not drawing the attack cards. And that is one of the biggest downsides of the restricted ones. You can only use them on a limited amount of cards, which means it gives you less flexibility in what you play that turn, but also less flexibility on what you can even spend them on. So that is very important. So the way I would look at it in general is how often, what's the average turn looking like that I'm going to be playing this? So maybe with the power of magic, we can bring up a chart from the previous video, which is about 2+ cost cards. But you can apply it to anything. How likely am I to draw one of X type of card if I have this many of them in the deck with this kind of like hand size kind of thing? And this is all before playing upgrade. It's kind of fresh take, but just a general look.
Yeah.
And what you could see is for attacks, if I've only got 5 attacks in my deck, I've only got a 51% chance to draw them in a 5 hand size. So that means Martial Prowess is only going to be working half the time, right? But on top of that, you have the consideration that it's kind of pushing you into playing the attack card because you might not necessarily want to play it. You might be, I'm losing to threat, but it's pushing me to use this resource in this way. Right. So there might be situations where, I think, especially as a newer player, you might end up, because you're incentivized to do an attack, play an attack when you shouldn't. And if you're on the other side of the spectrum, you restrain yourself and you just focus on, say, what's a little bit more important in that moment. You're still just not getting value, even though you've drawn the right card. So there are some severe downsides to the restricted ones, but they are cheaper, and that is really nice. With the Sphinx.
Oh no, that's really interesting. No? And one of the unintended consequences that I've never ever thought about, that I am a type of player that if I have that resource on the table, if I'm not using it, I feel bad, even though it may not be the optimized move. Oh my goodness, I just unlocked that about myself. That's interesting. Oh, cool.
We've all been there, and I will still want to. Wolverine, we'll just go completely off topic. He's got kind of a Martial Prowess similar thing where he likes attack cards to run through his claws,
Right.
And I always want to use that. I'm like, I'm at 3 HP. I can spare this 2 health. Probably
I'll get
can't.
It back.
No. So that's something interesting. In general, in terms of general resource generators, how many should you take? It kind of depends. In an ideal world, I think I said this on our first video we ever did together, not part of the series where it's more of an interview with me. I like to kind of aim for 4. I won't always hit it. Sometimes I'll have 2. Sometimes I'll have 1. But 4 is in my head. An average, across the board on any hero. If I've got 4 in the deck, I feel good. And one of the advantages of resource generators are, well, the way to take advantage of them is to get them down early. If you get a resource generator down on turn 1, you're getting an extra resource every single turn.
Yeah.
The sooner you get it down, the better. So by aiming to have 4 in the deck, I have, given myself a really good chance to get them in the mulligan, but B, a good chance to get it early, to get one down early, so I'm starting to get more value. And I think some of the value of resource generators over other upgrades, because there are various upgrades in the game that might give you, value equivalent to one resource in some manner or way.
Mm-hmm.
But resource generators are very flexible in that. I mean, it depends on how restricted it is, but on what kind of card you can pay with it. If I've got a Heli Carrier, that can help me fort, can help me attack. It could pay for an ally, and I think that's really strong. So, in general, I want 4 completely unrestricted resource generators. Not really realistic, but, that's what I'm looking to kind of go for. But after Heli Carrier and say Quinn Carrier or X-Jet, sometimes your options run thin on those really nice, easy, unrestricted ones. And sometimes they're quite expensive. And if your deck has a high cost curve, as we've talked about, you might be further in, you might have double second thoughts about, putting all of those in there. Avengers Mansion is the most expensive one. Very good card, though. Card draw's very strong.
Yeah.
So I'm aiming for 4, and it'll depend on the character and the general the faction traits. Let's say Guardian doesn't have a Quinn Carrier or an X-Jet, so I'll happily go for 2 or 3 when I'm playing a Guardian in that respect.
Do you is hand size a consideration here for these resource generators? Like when you say you want 4 resource generators, is that typical for a 5 hand size hero, or and then maybe you don't need as many if you have someone like a 6 hand size hero or like an Iron Man that can get up to 7, because you inherently have that extra resource, you don't need to generate it?
It's interesting how 5 is really quite a sweet spot. Because the problem you will find with a 4 cost hero, a 4 hand size hero, to go to the smaller side first, is that you might not have the right cards to pay for with the resource generator. So kind of goes back to a little bit in the previous video. But let's say I've got Marshall Paris on my 4 hand size hero. Now I have even less chance to draw an attack card. But also I have less cards to spend that on. So if I get a 1 cost card, a 0 cost card, a double resource, do I really need all these resource generators on the board? I would say depends on the resource generator.
Okay.
Because that's where card draw, in terms of being a resource generator, comes in more useful.
Okay.
You can never have too much card draw, but maybe there's an exception on the extreme end. But generally, since you can spend a card on any other card, and it also is an option that you can spend other resources on, as long as you keep getting cards, you can keep doing stuff.
Right.
You keep getting resources, you have nothing left in your hand, and that's not extreme. Once you've got 4 resource generators out, when I say I put 4 in the deck, it doesn't always mean I will play all 4.
Okay.
It means I will try and get them into play. So that is something to consider. Sometimes if I've got just 2 resource generators out, I consider myself in quite a strong spot. And some villains I'll be like, that's fine. I will go into the attack mode in solo play.
Right.
I've got enough money here. 7 hand size heroes, Iron Man. In a way, I'm treating every piece of tech he's playing as a resource generator because it's giving me another card. Until you've got your 7 hand size, I'm thinking every piece of tech has this extra line that says, oh, and you get +1 extra hand size.
Yeah.
And that is really how it works. You will get that extra card in hero form. So I'll still try and run 1 or 2, maybe 3, but I'm not so worried about it, especially getting them into play.
Okay. That is really interesting. Now I have a couple of specific examples that I personally am curious about, and so I want to get your take on cards like the enhanced cards. So like enhanced awareness, enhanced fit. I don't like them, but I want to know why I'm wrong or why I'm right. So the reason that I don't like them is these come in with 3 resources that you can then use for anything throughout the rest of the game. You exhaust it, remove a counter, you get 3 of them, and you do that. The reason that I don't really like them is that it's an effective resource cost of 3. It's a 2 cost card plus the card itself. So you're net 0 on resources, and the benefit comes in the flexibility of when you can spend them. But am I just not looking at these correctly, or what's going on here?
Generally, I don't think they're worth including if you have all the cards currently released in the game at the time. If you've only got the core set, I think they look a lot more appealing
Okay.
because they are not inherently bad cards. The way I think of them is a little bit like how I think about Spider-Ham's toon counters, just on a limited amount. Uh, what you're doing when you're playing an enhanced card is you're paying free effective resources to get free effective resources over the next few turns. You're
Yeah.
banking resources in the moment for later. The other strength of them, of course, is they are locked to a specific resource type, which might be synergized with your deck.
Right.
The physical one for Hulk is probably quite a well-known example. Or I've seen people before they have Quinn Carrier, they will run the mental resource generation for Iron Man, so he can get his boots online and fly reliably. So I would say the benefits of them are twofold. Is one that you can have a quiet turn, and you can save your resources from that turn to use over the next few turns, where maybe things get a bit more intense and you need the resources. That's something about upgrades in general, is that it's better to play them on a quiet turn and have them when you need them on a busy turn,
Yeah.
as opposed to I'd rather personally get another resource generator out instead of 6 damage to the villain. And it can depend, because if I can win the game off that, great. But if I lose the game because I couldn't deal with what he threw out, so there is a playstyle thing in how far you want to go from
Yeah.
rush to tempo to control, and that's generally the gist of it. I will say, having the right option at the right time, you'll hear me say this in every video, is really valuable.
Yeah.
And they're almost like having a resource card in a way, as well as they're kind of 50% between a resource card and a resource generator, in that they're so limited. You will run out of it. It is finite. Whereas most resource generators are theoretically infinite if the turns keep going on.
Right.
So generally, I would say if you have a full card pool, you should only very, very rarely be including the enhanced ones. There are exceptions. Some people like them. Personally, I'm the same page as you. I think there are better cards I could be playing with those resources. But they can be nice to bank them. If your build relies on one specific type of resource, it can be good too.
Interesting. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. I haven't run them in a long time, but I can see how, like, a Captain Marvel or a Hulk, or I'm trying to think of what would be another example of one that would want the mental resource. We don't really have a hero that works. I guess Ironheart.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And anyone with Genius who wants Moon Girl to reliably draw a
Yeah.
card is a good one. There's actually the Captain Marvel ally. I've ran decks around that recently. She's actually very strong, and she won't necessarily. It's more about what you discard from your deck with her. But there are in leadership decently limited amount of energy cards, and if you're in 4-player, you might need to. Okay, I need a more energy card to put that in. It's normally kind of a last resort for me, but as a last resort, it's the last resort I'm choosing over worse options. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So that bridges me into Resourceful. I have never played this card. This is the enhanced wild, but I think it's a 2 effective cost for 1 resource, correct?
Yes. So it's a 1-cost card that generates a resource. But as a 1-cost card, you're paying the resource for it and the card itself. So you start with 2 resources, and then you can use it to generate 1. You can kind of see how the maths on that is. But there are some advantages to it. Again, you can bank it for when you need. But, it's basically I spend 2 to get 1 later.
Yeah.
That's not how investing in things really typically works in most cases. There are use cases, but they are very niche in my opinion. It was brought to my attention recently by a fairly big deck builder. I actually don't know how his name is pronounced. I don't know if it's Dr. 00 or Drew, but you might have heard of him. He's on Marvel CDB a lot as well. You'll see his decks very, very well known. Where he would use Resourceful, I think, with Quicksilver. And when you ready up with Quicksilver, you have the friction resistance resource generator. Sometimes you can lose that last resource it generates because you'll spend your last card on readying up. Friction resistance readies up. You can't spend it. but you can kind of
Oh,
bank it with Resourceful.
okay.
Um, I'm not a huge fan of it, but it's definitely a better use than a lot of times. I think Nova can also like it because it's a wild itself, so you can spend it on his cards. But you can also bank it, and when he has a massive turn, unleashing the Nova Force, you can then get an extra event out sometimes with it. So there
Okay.
are little cases. I think one of the new upcoming heroes. I don't know how much we're gonna talk about stuff there, but that she will. Spoilers, like it.
She why will okay, so I'm curious why she likes it, because she likes it to discard. So she likes it just as a sense that it is a printed wild resource on the card, not necessarily for playing the card itself. We're talking about Domino. If
Yep.
you want to know more about Domino, I'll throw a link somewhere where we can read up or watch more on her. But is that what you're kind of thinking of? You're not necessarily
Yes.
storing the resource. You're just using it as a to fuel her ability.
She can store it as a backup. I don't know if she's going to want it in every deck, but it's definitely going to be an option because, if you end up having the wrong amount of what you need, you can just play it and bank it for later. But otherwise, it's still another wild in your deck.
Okay. And then the last one, and I probably will come up with more, but I just had a couple that I was like, I need to ask Villain about these. The last one is Clarity of Purpose. Tell me about Clarity of Purpose, because it feels really good for me for a lot of heroes. Like,
Mm.
yeah, tell me.
So, Clarity of Purpose is a really good card. And I could end it there. I could end it there. I honestly could. If you've ever played Venom and used his hero ability, then Clarity of Purpose is effectively the same. You have to pay to bring it into play, but it does the same thing. You take a damage, you generate a wild resource. Number one, wild resources are very good. And as I talked about Guardians, Web Warriors, I think even Champions, some of them have a way to get a wild resource, but not everyone. And that's where Clarity comes into play, because now all these characters will have a source of a wild resource. Even the characters who do have a source have another one. But it's really the cost. It is a one cost upgrade that is kind of the level we talk about with hero resource generators typically. And some of those are even two resource. This is a one cost resource generator, and that is very powerful. You might think, oh, but I take damage, and that is relevant. And if you're low health, you don't want to use Clarity of Purpose. If you're one health, you definitely don't want to use it. Uh, you know, um, but it's really strong, and you can do the maths on this. If you use it a certain amount of times, you take a certain amount of damage. You can actually calculate how much the healing costs and how much typically is valued at in the game, and you can kind of calculate how it works out. Um, and to me, I would say it is sort of, in a way, half the cost of Quinn Carrier, but you're generating half the resources because you're having to pay money back in to get your health back, right?
Right.
You could think of it like that. But the beauty of a one cost card in general is, we talked about this bit in cost curves, is the lower the cost it is, the easier it is to play and fit around the other things you're playing.
Right.
So it's half the cost of Quinn Carrot and maybe half the resource generation, but it's also it's probably more than half as easy to actually play it in the first place, and that is really valuable. The other thing we've talked about a little bit in this video is that the earlier you get a resource generator out, the more valuable it is. But the earlier you get Clarity of Purpose out, the more valuable it is as well, because you start with more health than you're probably going to have the rest of the game. There are exceptions, you play Symbiote Suit, whatever, but in general, you've got more health to play with. So you can play this one cost upgrade, then generate a resource, and it costs you a health. But now you're building up your board faster. You've put less into getting the resource generator, and you've got the resource generator going forward. So it kind of almost can snowball. So I love Clarity of Purpose.
Okay, cool. And perfect bridge into what I want to talk about next is timing of these resource generators. Are you always looking at, like, what is your timing? My rule of thumb is that I want it to at least pay for itself. Now there are situations where that can alter, but if I'm paying 4 effective resources for a Quinn carrier, I want 4 turns left. That changes, but that's kind of what I'm thinking. When are you looking at the timing of getting these on the table? We've already said turn 1 is excellent, but if you think that maybe you are approaching mid to late game, how do you approach resource generators differently now?
Yeah, we've already touched on it a very tiny bit, and you are effectively right. But whereas you're looking to, break even, I'm kind of looking to profit. The way I see, and this is not just resource generators, but or slower value cards is because the value is locked away over time. I kind of want to get more back for my investment.
Yeah.
If I've got like a hazard icon side scheme, a big scary minion, it's more valuable for me to get the a less of less total amount but quicker immediate amount to get rid of it,
Mhm.
so it's not hurting me constantly, than just get a drip feed. And getting it little by little is very valuable in terms of that you can divide where it goes. Um, but really, I want more than just to break even. So with something like Quinn Carrier, it, it can depend on your turn as well. A little bit like what I'm talking about banking resources. If it's a quiet turn, I can even play it near the end of the game just to make sure if
Mm,
anything bad does happen, I can deal with it. But it depends what's in my hand, because if I have really good other options, I'm not going to. But quiet turn, not good options, I will still play it anyway. I don't think it's a hard, fast rule of near the end of the game, never ever play resource generators.
I
But
like
you are
that.
right in general. Yeah, you are right in general that, mid game is that to lose a lot of value. Late game, almost never play. But they do still have a tiny bit of potential there.
Yeah, and I really like what you just said about the quiet turn. You want to get resources generators on the table on the quiet turn. So even when you look at a like expert claw who is throwing an entire city at you effectively turn one, you still may not want to put your resource generators on turn one. Now it still may be really good, but it's like you have if you have a nasty minion in front of you, you have a mortal claw, and you have defense network, that's a lot to deal with turn one, and so maybe that's not necessarily the best quiet turn to play your resource generator. Now, theoretically, over the long term, you're getting the most value out of it, but like you said, either in this video or the last video, it doesn't matter if you've got the value if you're dead, if you've lost the game. And so I really like that idea of looking at it rather than timing is quiet turn versus do I need to take care of a problem or can I play the resource generator and still take care of the problem?
Yes, absolutely.
Cool.
I agree with everything there, especially about the point about claw is really good. Um, the way you mulligan and even like frame your turn one, this is kind of a different topic, but that will change scenario to scenario. Some scenarios do come out, they come out swinging, and you got to swing back.
Yeah. Yeah. Ooh, that I like that. Okay, so we've touched on it a little bit, but let's now just refine and dig a little bit deeper on resource generation versus discounts versus card draw and why we like card draw more. You said you can never have enough card, well, you can never have too much card draw. And explicitly state why that is.
Okay, so you have some resource generators that offer discounts, and honestly, for all intents and purposes, these are very similar to just normal resource generation. The big downside is you can't spend these on attachments, like I was saying. I think I referenced earlier, and restricted resource generators also can't do that. But you got things like helicarrier, team building exercise, deft focus. All of these offer a -1. Sometimes the discount turns off certain bonuses you get for paying certain resources toward a card. So if a card says you've got to pay a physical to get this bonus and you've reduced it to 0, you got a problem. Uh, you know, Wolverine's Claws does that for some
Yeah.
cards. That's for um, but in general, I would say a discount is just as good as generating a resource in 90% of circumstances. At least when it comes to player cards. So they're pretty equivalent, and those help you play more of your cards, but they do not give you more options. Whereas card draw, you draw it into your hand. Not only is it another option to play, but you can just spend it as a resource as well. And something that's really good about card drawing, and especially in the early game, but at most points, is it lets you go through your deck quicker. Okay, there's an encounter card coming at the end of your deck, um, but you're going to get maybe your more important upgrades sooner. So early game card draw is particularly good, but in general, you're going to find more important cards sooner, as well as just, you're not necessarily getting another option as good as what you've got. You might get something very important or the right solution to the problem you couldn't otherwise solve. It's not particularly, it's kind of an inbuilt resource generator action to Spider-Man's hero card. He gets attacked, he draws a card. If you draw backflip as that card, that's worth a couple resources to you probably.
Yeah.
You've got the perfect option at the right time, and that is the power of card draw, is getting what you need when you need it more often.
Yep.
But they all kind of feel a similar slot in that you're doing more per turn, but cards are actually giving you options, and that's why having you can't have too many cards because you always can spend them on something, whereas resources you only have so many cards to spend them on.
Excellent. And this is also something that we were talking about when we were not recording, but the card that gets you the solution that you need to that particular problem is card draw, where you get to see other cards, like Tony Stark's Futurist ability is even stronger. So Tony Stark, you get to look at the top 3 cards of your deck, choose one of those to draw, discard the others. Very, very good, because one, you get more options to see what you need to do, or two, you can, I guess for Pepper, like discard correctly. You can, I just the new ally that we're getting in Next Evolution, that she gets played whenever you discard her. That seems really good with Tony. Anyways,
Absolutely, incredibly good with Tony.
Sorry, my mind just went on a tangent. But there's just like, talk to me about that. And I think Tony Stark AI does that. I don't play a lot of Ironheart. I feel like she should be a hero I enjoy. I just, for some reason, I don't. But I know Tony Stark AI does that. And then does spiritual meditation fit into this conversation at all?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting point. It's almost a different topic, but it is relevant to card draw. When we think of card draw as giving us another option in hand, it is possible with several heroes to look at more cards than you're allowed to keep. But by doing so, the ones you do keep, you can tailor pick which one is useful. So Iron Man with Futurist is a good example. Your alter ego, maybe you drew 6 cards. Now you get to look at 3 more. You only get to draw 1, but you looked at 3. So in essence, your options for that turn, you had 9 different cards you could have played. Even if you only have 7 in hand at any one point, you had 9 to look through. That's almost a quarter of your deck. That's an extremely large amount of options. Like that's huge. I mean, okay, you could go up to 50 it's like 50 card deck, but for most decks they're 40. So Futurist, extremely strong ability. Tony Stark AI, very similar. You can do it when you're not alter ego as well. She gets 6 size as well. Ironheart can in hero form at her last form. So again, she can basically, let's say she starts a turn with her 6 hero hand size and her final form. She's Tony Stark AI. She'll only draw 1. She'll be at 7 cards as well. But she looked at 8. Spiritual meditation. Again, you draw 2 cards, discard 1. You're getting to see a lot more cards that turn. Captain Marvel's good for this. You spend an energy resource, you draw a card. Her support, the name escapes me, the space station, flight station, Alpha Flight Station.
Yeah.
Again, you're discarding and drawing, but you're getting to see more, even though you don't keep all of them. And I think that's really powerful. Having the right option at the right time is really good. Yeah. Who knew having the solution to problems was good?
Exactly. So card draw is good. We want to prioritize that, and the game knows that. Just if you look at the cost of a Quinn carrier versus an Avengers Mansion, or a Helicarrier versus an Avengers Mansion, I guess is a more apt comparison, because Quinn carrier can only be played by Avengers. An Avengers Mansion, anyone can live there apparently. But so the card draws are good, and if you can see more, great. Before we go into resource sinks, and there may be more that we want to talk about in generation, but I do have like a practical question, or I want to work through a practical example with you, and that would be like Thor. So Thor has 2 Goddess of Thunders. He has that generates a lightning resource. You can put those are unrestricted, play those on anything. He has Asgard. Is that considered to you a resource generator, or no? It's just a +1 hand size.
I would say yes, and I would say Sorcerer Supreme is as well. I think increases in hand size is basically, it's kind of an Avengers Mansion for yourself that's going to go off no matter what, is how I look at it. I look at it in a very similar way to that. So that is how I would view it. 2 good of Thunders, Asgard. I would say because Asgard increases your hand size, and again, you can't have too much card draw. You could go over the 4 I've mentioned.
Okay.
Although he likes cheap cards, so I probably wouldn't. I think throwing in a Queen carry to him or a Marshall Press, that can kind of be enough. Because when you're starting at that 4 hand size, having too many upgrades can be a downside as well. You will need to be able to deal with what you need to that turn.
Right.
I would include it.
And then his ability, which is have at thee, maybe whatever his ability is. Whenever he engages a minion, he gets to draw two. Where does that fall into the equation, or consider or thoughts?
It's kind of resource generation, but it's not a resource generator specifically. I mean, it kind of is.
Yeah.
It depends how you classify it. It gets blurrier. So every hero will have an ability, except Hulk. He kind of has an unability.
Poor
Uh,
Hulk.
but generally, every hero will get an ability that adds value to them. And Thor's ability is he gets cards. He gets a lot of cards potentially. Um, so it does count, but in sort of the way that you can't generally have too much card draw. You
Right.
can, but I generally won't worry about that in my calculations because I can't guarantee I'm going to engage a minion. I can guarantee what resource generators I put in my deck. So kind of control what you can control. And if you get extra benefits, the good thing about cards is you generally won't have too many.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Yeah. I wanted to talk through that, and also is there anything else that we want to talk about with resource generators or resource or card draw before we talk about sinks?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, something I don't think I specified specifically, I hinted at, but I didn't go into full detail with, is when we started talking about martial prowess, I was talking about how many attack cards would you want in your
Yeah.
deck
Okay.
to use it with. Um, if we take the example I had, you've only got like, let's say 5 attack cards, you're only drawing an attack card at 50% of the time. You know, comparing martial prowess to helicarrier then is kind of a case of that. Um, I pay 1 more for helicarrier than martial prowess, but I'm using it on more turns, so I'm getting more value across the game. And that is a lot of the way I value what to play. And a little bit like what we talked about as well, that having a resource generator, a restricted one for a specific type of card, pushes you toward playing that. The unrestricted ones let you play what you need completely openly.
Yeah.
And I really put a lot of value on having the right option. So a lot of the time these days, I will run, if I'm playing Shadowcat, for example, I will run X-Jet before I run Nerves of Steel.
Okay.
I could potentially run both, but personally, I'd say more than the average player in general, or average even deck builder, I put a lot of value on unrestricted resource generators because I can not only play what I need, um, but if I'm always going to get the value. So I just wanted to emphasize that point, really.
Okay. Yeah. And so now I have another question that kind of calls back to our resources video where we're talking about the power ofs and looking at the 9 to 10 targets for the power of. So we want that many cards to have double resources. Is there ever a time where you're sitting at 10 protection cards that cost 2 or more and like 0 basic cards? I mean, this is hypothetical, right? Are you more apt, because you are already running a power of protection, to run a power of or to run a Nerves of Steel that costs that 2, that power of protection can help discount, get onto the table quicker, over a Quinn carrier that is going to be 4 effective resources regardless of how you pay for it, whereas you may be able to get the explicit discount with the power ofs? Does that ever come into consideration?
It's definitely a consideration. It's tricky because I think if you're running Nerves of Steel, you need a lot of protection events, and then if you're just finding the power of protection with a lot of those, it's hard to make them all
Right.
fit. Um,
Right.
but it varies. I would say I would normally play it by ear. I will say if I've got the defense events to justify Nerves of Steel, and do have power protection, that probably might sway it. That's kind of like the tiebreaker almost.
Okay.
Um, an interesting point we haven't talked about for resource generators that I will bring up briefly. This kind of extends to resource cards in the previous video. Is you can add more if your character doesn't. Some characters, especially with higher cost curve, they will have to pay more to get more done, or their turns will be more rigid, so you want to play more. So you can add resource cards and resource generators to a deck initially, and then build around, justifying their inclusion. Or you can do it the other way around and say like, oh, I've got a bunch of attacks, now I'll put in martial prowess. So you can come at it from 2 different angles, which I think is good to remember. There are 2 different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And is it a is it a trap if you're looking at someone who already has a really high cost curve? We use Hulk as the extreme example, but who was it, Storm or Rogue? Rogue was our example in our cost curve video.
Yes.
Which no, because you have the deck with all of the resource generators in it. But like, is it some sort of consideration or is it some sort of trap? Because inherently to me, when I see a high cost hero, I want to add resource generators in to help pay for it, but that's also increasing my cost curve. And so am I just like kind of shooting myself in the foot at some points? Or is that not how I should be looking at it? I can use those high cost cards because every card is a resource to get those cost cards on the table and maybe just play that longer game rather than that short to try and bring that cost curve down.
I would say it's very mixed. I don't think there's one clear answer. I would say there's a grain of truth in what you say, but it will depend. I do think on uh Hulk, let's take Hulk as the example. Um if I'm spending a whole turn playing, let's say, Heli Carrier, because that will take his whole turn most of the time, you can then get put behind on the board. So I would say yes, but it depends on the hero.
Okay.
Low hand size hero, Petty Parker, is a very different story because she can do a lot. There are generally heroes that bring a lot of consistency on their bring a lot of their power on their hero card, on their identity, and they can do the same things every turn. And even with the upgrades, Iron Man is a great example of that. He's got his helmet down, his power gauntlets. He's dealing damage and threat removal every turn. Captain America, he can do this all day. He can fort, he can attack, he can defend and then ready up to fort or attack. Uh, you know that's really strong. But other characters rely on events. They're a little bit more unreliable because you might not always have the event you need to do what they need to do. And I think that is a factor. If your hero can do a lot without worrying about what's in your hand, you can kind of solve what you need to, and then still play the resource generator and still get a good bit done. So it does vary. And I would just say, as long as you're keeping that in mind and thinking about it, you're probably doing more than probably the majority of people, and I think you're probably on the right track.
Cool. Awesome. Okay, so let's talk about resource sinks now. And what is a resource sink versus a resource generator?
They're in many ways the opposite. So a resource generator gives you a resource. Resource sink doesn't take it away, but it gives you somewhere to put it. Generally, these are things you'll put spare resources into. Some of them are good enough that you'll do it anyway. I would say most of them have times where you, even if you your whole hand would work out well in other ways and you don't need to spend resources there, you still might want to. Those are some of the best ones because they obviously have a lot of worth beyond just discarding spare resources. But effectively, if you have excess resources, you might want a resource sink to put them into to make sure nothing is wasted. Yes, that is how I'd probably define it overall.
Okay, and so we talked about this in our very first video, the Plan B. Plan B is, I think, a really excellent example of a resource sink. Exhaust Plan B, discard a random card from your hand, deal 2 damage to an enemy. I've come around a little bit on it. I held true to my word. I ran it in a couple of in a good number of decks, and so you were right. Just I'll say it. But that is kind of the idea in the card that we are talking about, right?
Yeah, I wasn't going to be the one to bring up, Plan B. Bit of contentious history there.
Yeah.
Not every character is a Plan B character, but a lot of them are. I like it. It's one of my favorite ones. So yeah, that is exactly it. So it's a card. It can be an upgrade or it can be an ally. Maybe supports fall into this, but basically it's typically a permanent or semi-permanent card. Semi-permanent, I can't talk. Card that you put on the board that you can feed resources into. So an example used in the previous video is Black Panther gets all those vibranium. Well, once all your upgrades are on the board, what are you going to do with these vibraniums? You're like, oh, I can play Wakanda forever, but I've got twice the value I need to,
Yeah.
and I've only got like a couple of them. What am I going to do? And that's where these can come in really useful. There are even examples which technically these are allies. But there are cards which you can have X cost or you can overpay for, and you won't always have those to hand, but you can kind of balance out your hand by spending anything excess on those as well.
Are you talking about like Moon Girl or
Moon Girl? I always want to put at least 3 into at all times, but she is kind of an example. Yes, I would say more specifically, you've got Wasp in aggression and Ant-Man in leadership. Those cards where you overpay, they get extra. And Quicksilver himself as a hero has the Cyclone card. I think
Yep.
Speed Cyclone, which
Yeah.
is X. You can choose what X is, and boom. So you can kind of just put anything. Oh, I've got all these cards. I'll just stun everyone.
Why not, right? Okay. I'm on the same page for now. So, and what I think is nice about those allies is that the first time you play him, like you can get Ant-Man out for a two effective cost. You can pay a one for him, and then chump or whatever, he's flexible, and then next time around you have your board state built up, you have the excess resource, you can sink more cost for, now he's out and he's doing a lot more for you. Okay, I think I'm on the same page now. And then what about like Machine Man? Is how does that enter the conversation where whenever he uses a basic power, a thwart, or attack, spend up to 3 resources, he gets plus X, where X is the number of resources spent to that activation. And they did come out and crush everyone's spirit and say that is until the end of the activation, not forever, because there is no terminology on that card. Like, well, this is an OP card.
Yeah, yeah. I think me and my partner have had that same discussion. We're looking at this card. It says just gains these stats. It doesn't say how long. Uh, but yeah, just for clarity, it is for the activation. If anyone is wondering, Machine Man I think fits into a category that also, and again, Machine Man and the other cards I talk about are actually worth their cost, even outside the consideration as a resource sink. If you don't put a single extra resource into Machine Man, I still think you've got good value. Might not be the best value of all allies ever, but you still got good value. He has free health, 1 to both stats, so you can thwart twice and block with him. 2 threat move on a block. Everyone likes that. That
Yeah.
is, excellent. I would include him alongside, mainly I would say, uh, Starhawk is what I'm thinking of.
Okay.
Starhawk is a protection ally. You play him, and if he receives consequential damage equal to his remaining hit points, he will come back to your hand. He's kind of a card you can put out there, and if you're not going to have the resources to play him again, you can just leave him be, and only pop that consequential when you're going to replay him.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's an interesting way to use him. It's not the only way to use him. You can just chain him all the time because he is good value. You can just block with him or just use his consequential because you need it. But it is an interesting use of him that I see Machine Man in a bit of a similar way. Machine Man is finite. Once he's out of hit points, he's gone. Um, uh, but because he lasts for several turns, at least 2 to 3, and um, you might not use him every single turn
Yeah.
anyway, or you might, have ways to recur him. He's around for a good bit of time. That he's pretty consistent, I would say, in that regard.
Okay. Cool. So I have questions about specific resource generators or sinks that we can get to, but when are you typically looking to run resource sinks? We said Black Panther because he can, he likes to build and now he needs something to do all this with all this money, but when are you looking to run these?
Yeah, it's. I mean, Black Panther's kind of the epitome of it, I would say. Um, but any character who has a lot of resources, maybe too many, is a good option. The other side of the coin is characters that have a lot of cards that are very conditional, and you might not meet the condition to play them.
Mm.
So if you have a lot of leftover cards, a character I really like Plan B for is Cyclops. not
Ooh,
only is
okay.
it not only is it a tactic and an upgrade, so he can just grab it turn 1 if he
Yeah.
wants to. Not always best, but it's an option, and you're set up. But if he draws a hand of hero upgrades, you know, he might even draw 2 of the same one, and there might not even be a minion out. Especially if you're in solo, what are you going to do with all these spare tactics? You might not be able to spend everything efficiently. So sometimes rather than give the villain -1 attack, especially since he likes allies, I'm probably just going to block it with an ally anyway.
Right.
I will just throw that into Plan B, and Cyclops is a man with a plan. He likes making plans. He's a tactics guy, right? Um, uh, that's kind of an example of what I would do. I think also the 4 hand size heroes, because quite often you will have the leftover card where they don't have the options to make every card be played, to let them play every card efficiently. So Hulk is a physical resource. He likes Plan B, in my opinion. Maybe not in every single deck, but in quite a lot of them. Plan B is specifically, since I'm talking about it now, I like it in Justice, Protection, and sometimes Leadership, but especially Justice and Protection, because it adds damage,
Right.
and that is something those aspects lack. So there's that a little bit of variance too, and you're not going to be like, I'm on this character, I need a resource generator. Sometimes a resource sink, sorry. Sometimes specific resource sinks are better for certain characters and aspects. Um,
Yeah.
so that's a factor.
And that's one of the things that is so counterintuitive to me, where like to when I'm looking at it at face value, 4 hand size heroes want resource generators, and higher hand size heroes want resource sinks, but that's not always the case, and it's because of the efficiency and playing the right cards at the right time. And that is just something that is so counterintuitive to me, but it does make sense. I ran plan B in my Justice Hulk deck this morning when I was playing against Taskmaster, and worked out really well because a lot of times you're playing a 2 cost card, 4 hand size, 3 effective resource, you're left over with 1 card. If that's not a 0 cost card, it's now 2 damage.
Yep.
It's just a really consistent way to, oh my goodness. That was another one of the enlightenments of just talking with you during this series, is that these lower hand size heroes, they like resource sinks because it gives them options.
Yeah. Like if I'm playing Hulk, for example, I won't always play Plan B the moment I see it, but if I can afford to, I'm trying to, and that kind of goes into as well. Um, some heroes have more they can do with their hero cards. Since Hulk has free attack, he can get quite a lot of damage done that way, but he still likes more damage. But you can afford to maybe play an upgrade and set up for the future if you leave. You're relying on his identity to get stuff done in the moment. Um, you can it might be slightly off topic, but what I like about a lot of these cards, honestly, is that they raise the minimum floor you have for
Mm.
what they do. So, if you read some of the things I've written or some of my deck write-ups, what I like about Plan B is that once it's in play, doesn't matter what my hand size is, my minimum damage is now too high than before because I can always just use something on Plan B. Um,
Yeah.
And once your minimum for damage and thwarting is more than the villain can put out, you're basically in a winning situation there,
Mm-hmm.
which is something I like. And it's not always possible to get that, but it is very nice to have the. It's not just a way to spend excess resources, but it's a way to make sure you have the right kind of output you might need as well.
That makes so much sense. That's, yeah, I like that. I really like the way that you said that. Okay, so resource sinks, are there any times that you're not running them? Or like give me an example
Yeah.
of when you are not running them, I guess is a better way to phrase the question.
There's a lot of I would honestly say most decks I'm not running one.
Okay.
I'd say the majority I'm not. But I probably run more than most people do, especially Plan B. It remind if you watch other videos with me and Nelson, I like Star Lord a lot. He's got element guns. He can feed a card, kind of a resource, and do damage.
Yeah.
I really value that kind of thing. But in general, I'm not running resource sinks on everyone. I think the lower your cost curve is, um, the less I'm running them. So it will depend on what resources you add. But on one side of the spectrum, you have not with the hero spectrum. Um, on one side of the let's say kind of heroes and decks you have low cost curves. If you have low costs, you can generally make everything add up efficiently. So
Yeah.
I don't need to feed excess things because I'm probably not going to have anything excess. On the other side, we've got the Black Panther who keeps coming up. We've got the characters with a lot of resource cards who are likely to have too many resources. Also, too many resource generators. Um, I think Spider-Man is a good example of this. A lot of his cards are situational. Um, he's got the enhanced spider sense. If you don't get a treachery, you can't use it. Backflip, what if you start alter ego? You can't use it. He can get a lot of things you can't spend, a bit like Cyclops with the tactics. So it comes a lot down to hero, and it comes down to partly to costs and how many resources or cards that might not be playable.
Yeah. It's really cool to look at when you are building a deck, is looking at how situate it, cost curve and resource generators, all of that considered. But also another kind of lever to think about is how many situational cards do you have in your deck, and what are you going to be using those situational cards on if the situation does not arise. That's really interesting.
Yeah. There's a certain category of card I would call a low impact card, which might be a basic example is a just discard surveillance team, you're removing one threat per turn. You might, and I put that in a similar category. That if you have too many of those and you have a big problem in front of you, it's not going to help you immediately. Some of these resource things will give you more immediate value than other cards. So that's another place you might want to use them. Resource things we haven't talked about. One would be Jarnborn. Hope I'm saying that right. Probably not. Um, it's so good. You might just use it as part of your main strategy. I think most decks with it do. It's probably Yarnborn, isn't it? Uh, um, but you can just use it to spend spare resources. But you can use it as part of your main strategy. Lockjaw is another one. Um, if I'm Hulk, I can't play what I need to play, or I've got limitless strength. Maybe the energy resource to 0 cost. I keep bringing this kind of example up.
Yeah.
But now I'll just bring out, good boy Lockjaw. He'll come out to play and he will help out. So, yeah.
Lockjaw is a card that I have not used a lot historically, but something that I've started using more recently. He's good.
He is good.
Lockjaw is really good. Lockjaw is the 4-cost basic ally that you can play from your discard pile. 2 threat, 2 thwart, 2 attack, 2 consequentials on both. And so now you have flexibility. And I think that's what a lot of these conversations boil down to, is how can you optimize your flexibility and increase your flexibility? And Lockjaw is an incredible resource sink to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a good callback to the previous video where I was talking about you can boost like the ceiling of your deck's output, but also the floor. And resource sinks boost the floor, because you could have the perfect hand to spend all your resources all the time, and then you're getting probably really good benefit. But you're not always going to have that. And if you don't have the resource sinks, if you find yourself in a situation where you always have a card left over every time, if you had plan B, you would have 2 damage every time.
Right.
So that's where it starts to pay off.
Very interesting.
And Lockjaw is... I hated Lockjaw when I first started playing. I didn't see why anyone would ever use this character. But a bit like we defined in the previous video about effective cost, every card with a cost includes the card in your hand. Lockjaw's not a card in your hand.
Interesting.
He's actually a little less. And the way his health works out is a little random fact. He likes team training because it just works out to give him 1 more activation.
Yeah.
So if you're running team training, you probably have other good leadership cards, but Lockjaw, allies, but Lockjaw is handy.
Oh, that's interesting. I never thought about the effective resource cost of Lockjaw is 4, not 5.
Mm-hmm. He was also good for the power in all of us, the basic double resource kind of card. That he's always a target for in your discard pile, which is very powerful as well.
Yes. Okay. So resource sinks. Anything else around resource sinks or resource generators that we wanted to talk about? I know that we wanted to touch on meditation. We didn't really know where we wanted to throw this into the conversation, but let's talk about meditation real quick and how it can... Is it a resource generator? Or how does meditation work for you?
It's kind of closer to a resource card, but it's not a resource card. It comes with different costs. It's almost the opposite of a resource sink in a way. It's like if the resource is more valuable than your hero activation, that's kind of when meditation becomes really good. And it is quite good for setting up with. So meditation is reduces a card's cost by 3 when you play it, but you have to exhaust your hero is the trade-off. And the way I value that as a card, some people say, oh, it's 3 resources, but you exhaust your hero. So how much is your hero's activation worth? In the early game, setting up your board tends to be more valuable. So I think meditation is a card that is more valuable early on, but it still remains useful throughout, and it will vary depending on how good your hero is. If you've built up, let's say combat training, fluid motion, you start with 3 attack, now you've got 5 attack on average every turn. Do you want to exhaust yourself and deprive yourself of 5 damage for 1 resource? I don't really think so. That's the kind of deck I would say it's absolutely, I don't want it in. But the kind of deck I do want it in might be, one of my favorites is War Machine. He is a character who has tons of damage, but he has it in his events and his upgrades. So although, 2 attack is his joint highest stat on his identity card, he doesn't particularly need it. So he's a character where I'm always happy to say, oh, I'll take the resource instead. He needs money way more than he needs damage in general. He's It's a lot of maintenance maintaining that big war suit of
Yeah.
his.
Yep. Yep.
He needs a peaceful meditation, work out his finances, pay for the card.
Right.
Um, so that's kind of how I see it. I think the lower the value you put on your hero's activation, use of their, stats, the more value meditation has. Also, characters that like to stay alter ego for a bit, Black Widow comes up a lot.
Hmm.
Uh, Iron Man, who really values setting up fast, he values meditation. I think we did that in one of your live streams. We
Yep.
gave him a sonic rifle and
Yep.
meditation. Yeah, Tony Stark practiced a lot of meditation.
Yeah, and heroes that like to flip, heroes that can ready. Like I've run it in like higher cost curve Captain America decks where like meditation plus cap, if it's the first ally you play, can get a 4 cost ally onto the table. You can flip. I can do this all day and ready by discarding a card. And so I think it comes down to, and maybe this is no, we're not going to get into it in this video, but what the cost for what a cost for bit is, like what is the cost that you want to get 1 damage out, and you can formulaically determine if that is an effective utilization of your activation based on, if I can get 3 thwart with Phoenix, maybe not worth running a meditation, because maybe because if I can meditate, that's 1 effective cost for the resource as well as 3 threat removal. And so it's the opportunity cost that you have to consider when you're playing meditation.
Yeah.
But meditation goes fast. I mean, if if you can get a meditation in your opening hand, zoom, you get
It's
to go.
good.
Yeah.
That's a good point you mentioned. It is alter ego only, so it's better on heroes that can flip more often. In solo, in multiplayer, most characters kind of can, as long as your threat removal as a group can keep up.
Yeah.
But if you've got confuses, that makes it better. If you've got a lot of incentive to go alter ego, let's say War Machine needs to reload his ammo. If you flip a lot with War Machine, it's just 5 ammo all the time. Characters that want to flip is very good point in that regard. And also, if you it's conditional in being in the right form, or free to safely go into that form. It's also conditional on not being exhausted.
True.
But it's also conditional on, to really get proper value, you need a free cost card as well.
True.
So it has a few hoops to jump through. If I'm running meditation, it's a lot of, I mentioned sonic rifle. I'll also use it with beat cop. But you can use it with allies as well as a great call. You can use it, I think, with, is it called Covert Ops, the thwart and confuse event on Black Widow?
Yeah.
But you want to make sure you can get the free value out of it, because I don't think it's, unless you're really not using your hero activation like at all that turn, you decided I'm going to stay alter ego, it's not worth it for 2. You kind of, unless you're Iron Man setting up,
Right.
But generally 99% of the time it's not worth it for 2. So you want a free cost card.
Yeah.
So I'd probably, in my decks with meditation, either I would add free cost cards, or I would have more free cost cards. If the curve cost had more free cost, that would be the time I would actually add meditation in for them.
And we need to be careful as well, because it needs to be cards that can be played in alter ego. So you're locked out of your attack, a lot of your thwart events. You're locked out of Quinn Carrier. You can't meditate a Quinn Carrier unless you have honorary Avenger. And so I wouldn't necessarily look, I would do a little bit more research before just seeing like hey, I have a lot of 3-cost cards, because if those are all your swinging web kicks, your meditation's dead in your hand. So do a little bit more research to figure out, but it's a fun card. Oh my goodness. Meditation is one of the more fun cards of Marvel Champions, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. I would say meditation is one of those cards maybe you need to experiment a bit more with. Pinch more caution with meditation and most, resource kind of cards. Very good point.
But have fun with it, because you
have fun. Yeah,
you can go quick.
You can go very quick. You get some, Queen Carrier you can't play, but you can play Hattie Carrier. You can play Avengers Mansion, and then you're getting another card, and you might get meditation lining up with even better cards. So it's good.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, anything else before we close up and tease the next video?
The last thing I think I'll say, I don't have a definitive answer, but I think it's something that's worth thinking about when you're making a deck. Gonna go right back to martial prowess where we began. So I've got a bunch of attacks in my deck. maybe they're, aggression attacks. Maybe I've got the power in aggression in my deck. But if they're 2 cost, I want to use martial prowess as well, right? So now if I'm using martial prowess towards that red attack, my power and aggression is getting only 1 value again on it.
Mm,
So it's another factor in if you're running power of aggressions and martial prowess. If you're running some 2 restricted resource card and a restricted resource generator that hit the same kind of target, you might want to go even higher on either. You want to be careful not to go too high on the cost curve, too many high cost cards. But at the same time, you might want to lean a little bit more into that, or just more cards in general of 2 cost, so you can make sure you get the full benefit. I think is something good to add there.
really, really good point. Well, that was our discussion around resources and resource generators and resource sinks. Next up, we're going to be talking about how many cards you want to run. That means what your deck size looks like. That means how many of a specific type of card you want to be running. Maybe that's allies, depending on the archetype or whatever. We're going to have discussions around that. So that video will come out in insert X weeks here. Again, no idea when that will be, but that's great. I have had so much fun talking about resource generators and resource sinks. Resource sinks is something that I have discounted, I think, way too heavily in my deck building. And just talking with you, I'm really excited to try more of them. And it's because they're fun. They're fun. Cool. Excellent.
Yep.
So that's going to be it. Villain, before we sign off, can you tell everyone where they can find you?
Yes, if you're looking to see what I've done, I make decks on Marvel CDB. If you can give search by author, you can put my name in. It's VillainTheory, same as it is here. You'll see me around the place on Discord. I post some articles on Reddit here and there. Just look for my name and you'll find me.
Excellent. Well, thank you so very much for hanging out. I look forward to our next one. We'll see you around.
Yep.